Thank you, Barry. So, what do I mean about reimagining the business of travel? Let's use today's event as an example. Let me ask you a question. How many of you actually traveled in to Dallas to be with us today? Can you just show of hands? It's a lot. Just look around the room real quick. There's a lot of hands that are up there. Well, in doing that, when you got notification relative to the Sabre Technology Exchange, that set off a cascade of decisions that you needed to make. You probably quickly reviewed your calendar to see if you could actually make it. You thought about flight options. You thought about hotel. You had to think about the ground transportation. Some of you maybe jumped online to check to see what was available, understanding what was taking place, and maybe when you could get out of the office. Maybe you'd leave a little bit early. But it created a lot of decisions. And in doing that, guess what? Booking travel today is not easy. It's actually gotten more and more complicated. Because when you look at it, there are numerous options. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made. Do I have status? Is my seat assignment free? Are my check bags free? If you're buying a branded fare, what's the best branded fare? Should I use Uber? Should I rent a car? Maybe I'll use the hotel shuttle. Am I going to stay at a limited service hotel? Or maybe I'm going to stay at an Airbnb. As you can see, there's a number of decisions that have to take place after you actually make the choice that you're going to travel. You know, after you've gone through and you looked at it, many of you maybe had picked up the phone, called the corporate travel department, or maybe you used a corporate booking tool to book your travel. But the other thing that is changing are the number of tools and capabilities on how we actually book our travel. And with that, how is technology enabling that to take place? You know, what's interesting is when you look at this, and I'm using that example, each and every one of these bookings is based on specific views. There's an airline view, there's a ground transportation view, there's a hotelier view. There's not a complete view of the traveler. You as travelers, and actually the travelers that you serve. It's very segmented. It's very siloed in nature in what we're seeing. So, let's imagine, reimagine how retailing, distribution, and fulfillment of the entire travel ecosystem can be more seamless, can anticipate changes, can provide options, and most importantly, meet the demands and the wants of travelers throughout the world. You know, every traveler has a profile. They have preferences. There's things that travelers like to have. There's a favorite airline. We all have our favorite airlines that are out there. We know what cabin. Most of us would prefer to be in first class. It was all the time. There is a cabin. There's a seat assignment. I love the aisle seat. I don't check bags. So each and every one of us have preferences on ground transportation. Some of us like to use Uber all the time. Some of us like to have the rental car experience. But again, it's another choice. It's a profile that you have. And you know what? That profile changes too. There's individuals as a business traveler, and there's individuals as a family traveler. I have 3 boys, my wife, so when I travel on business, it's how do I go as quickly as possible. When I'm with my family, it's a little bit slower. But those are profiles relative to how we travel and what takes place. So when you think about it, it does drive into what are the desired hotels. And when I look at it, when I'm traveling with my family, I do like the limited service hotels because of the free breakfast for my kids. But those are things that take place relative to the profiles and what's going on. So, instead of shopping each segment independently, why not simply begin to build off a profile? Today's event, we know the location, we know the address of where STX is being held, we know the desired date, we know the arrival time that we'd like to be there. If you enter that, and guess what? there is a recommendation based on your wants and needs. And your profile can actually have, if you're traveling on a budget, how many dollars you can spend, and how does that align to the profile. You have an itinerary that pops up, using all the information relative to how you're booking travel today, not independent searches, but a single search. The capability of bringing this forward. If you like what you see, you just simply confirm. Now let's take this a little step forward here. Travel day has arrived, and we know the routine, right? You get up, probably 24 hours prior to your departure, you get notification from your airline that you can check in. And we go ahead and check in online. We show up at the airport, we board the airplane, we land, we arrive, we walk to our ground transportation, we go to our hotel and check in. Most times this works really well. Just guess what? There are levels of travel disruption. Does this look familiar for anybody living on the East Coast? Pretty familiar. It's been happening week after week after week. But in all fairness, travel disruption does take place. And in doing that, your flight has now been canceled. So you're very nervous about getting here for STX. Your flight has been canceled. But let's take that interconnectivity a step further. Today, what ends up happening is there's a sense of anxiety, there's a sense of panic when that flight cancels. We're calling our travel agent, we're calling our assistant, we may be doing it ourselves, but essentially there's individual calls that are taking place to the airline, to the hotelier, to your ground transportation. All trying to figure out, is there availability? Can I reconfirm anything? But, what if we started connecting those dots relative to how we look at disruption and how we make sure that we're fulfilling the needs of our customers at the end of the day? So, let's imagine, with what's taking place with the cancellation, you actually have the airline send you a notification that your flight has been canceled. And with that, the first ability actually to reconfirm is a morning flight. You go ahead and click yes, type yes. With that, think about how technology can then push that to the ground transportation. You get an update relative to your car service provider that essentially you have been rebooked for the next morning, that they have that notification. And what if that was then passed along to the hotelier? And the hotel knows that there has been changes in your plans. They make the change relative that you're not going to be staying the night. They know you'll be arriving early the next morning. And in doing that, they give you the opportunity to actually do early check-in. And you say, yes. And if you look at the time here, you arrived at DFW at 8:25, you're able to get in your car, you would probably be walking in the door right now to be joining us at STX this morning. These are the ways that we have to be thinking about what's happening as it relates to disruption. How do we think about technology? How do we think about the interconnectivity of what we do throughout the travel ecosystem? Because this is what our customers, your customers, are demanding at the end. We're all travelers. I guarantee as I was walking through this, everybody could relive a moment in time that they actually had to go through this process. And you wish there was a way of using the technology and bringing things together. So when you do that, you have the capability of actually going back, reconfirming, and having those changes. When I look at it, Sabre, and what we're doing, there is enormous potential for a technology platform that really enables all of these fragmented pieces to come together. We are spending an enormous amount of time right now focused on this, because you're going to hear me talk about why we look at it as one Sabre, why we brought you all here together today, because it's about the travel ecosystem that we actually live in. So I'd like to welcome you to STX. And this is important because I've been touching upon a number of the things that are taking place at Sabre. And it's an event that we thought, as it relates to what's happening in the world, the interconnectivity, what's taking place, it's important to bring all members of the travel ecosystem together. We have airlines represented, we have hoteliers represented, we have corporations represented, we have travel agencies represented. We'll still have the business tracks that we typically have had historically, because that's important. But I want to challenge you throughout the day, I want to challenge you this morning on how we have to be looking beyond the silos that we operate in today. Because that's what we're doing at Sabre right now. We're challenging those silos. And we have 3 distinct business units. We have airline solutions, we have travel network, we have hospitality solutions. And if you had actually asked the Sabre team, there has been actually silos within the organization. We're breaking those silos down because when you look at the opportunity of what we do, how we actually help enable you to be successful, you look at the amount of data that is there across the entire travel, how do we make sure that we're looking at the future and the opportunities to drive better things going forward? And it's important that we all have you together to talk about this. Now with that, we do sit in what I consider to be a pretty interesting perch. You know, I get to travel around the world, I get to meet with executives, be on the hotel side, on the agency side, on the airline side of the equation. And in doing that, there's a lot of similar themes that are taking place. But how do we make sure that we're collectively bringing those voices together to talk about those things? And what we're doing is what I've really driven to is how are we enhancing and how are we evolving our own strategies to think about these opportunities and what's taking place. So, when we reimagine the business of travel, and this is really from a Sabre perspective, but it's going to translate into how we're thinking about it for you, think of it this way, and I want you to remember this. Retailing, distribution, and fulfillment, and how it is interconnected. We're going to go into a little more detail, how these are interconnected. And I believe there's no other company that has the position, has a vision, and has the commitment to be the center of this platform. Really think about it from the business of travel. And I'll come back to this and spend a little more time talking about some of the things that we're actually seeing as it relates to why we're reimagining. Let's talk about some of the things that we have and think about the entire travel experience and what takes place. So when I look at the platform that we have, it really starts with our ability to capture, aggregate, and normalize an enormous amount of data. An enormous amount of data. And that data is changing. For those of you that are on the airline side or the hotelier side of the equation, the cruise companies, cruise line companies, the way that you're marketing your products and breaking them up, be it on the ancillary side, be it with branded fares, you're trying to find ways of actually generating more revenue. We have to look at it on how do we normalize that information to make sure that it actually goes through the entire distribution channel. The important thing is, it's all about creating unique and compelling offers, right? That's what we're wanting to help you do. That's what you're trying to do, is how do you create unique and compelling offers? And it starts before the journey. How do you actually make sure that people are looking at what is out there? What are the opportunities? How do I want to travel? What are the aspirational things that are there? At the original purchase point, you want to make sure that they're actually buying what they want. But guess what? It goes beyond that, right? If you look at mobile and mobile capability, how do you make sure that you can continue to buy and purchase along the way? And many are trying to figure out, how do I actually find price points? How do I look at data? How do I look at analytics to be able to drive more revenue throughout the entire journey? The other important piece, as we touch upon this, is how do we make sure that that is being delivered to the customer? When you're actually selling products and services, there's the fulfillment side of the equation. And it's getting more complicated. Now think about that. Think about all those things that I just walked through. If you're able to collect that data, you're able to collect that information, guess what? You can start refining that, right? Because if you know what travelers have bought at the beginning, throughout the process, if you look at it relative to revenue optimization, you begin to hone in on personas. You begin to understand more of what travelers want. And you take that information at the end and you recycle it back to the top of the funnel. Because when you do that, you're beginning to create offers that are driving more and more satisfaction for the end consumer. Now, there's a changing landscape taking place. And this is where I said I'm going to come back to why are we really looking at retailing, distribution, and fulfillment? And this is one where I probably enjoy my job the most, and that's where I get to travel around and listen to what's going on. Because why are we thinking and acting this way? So let me just start with airlines. Something that I see just happening globally throughout the world. You know, it's probably the most competitive environment, and it's probably the most different by region than I've ever seen. If you look at North American carriers, pretty stable right now. If you look at what's happening in the European marketplace, a lot of changes. The growth of low-cost carriers, certain carriers going away. Distribution changes with some of the large flag carriers. So you have changes that are there. Low-cost carriers, and there's low-cost carriers represented. If you go back to the early 2000, low-cost carriers made up about 6%, 7% of global seat share. Today, low-cost carriers make up 30% of global seat share. Significant growth. If you look at narrow-body orders throughout the world, the majority of those are low-cost carriers. Let's take this. The other thing is if you actually look at average fares have been declining. How many people know that average fares are actually declining? Just curious, show of hands. Average fares have actually been declining. You have ancillaries that have actually been increasing. So in doing that, the way that the marketplace is changing, this is both for low-cost carriers as well as full-service carriers, is that low-cost carriers are having an impact on that lower fare, and people are trying to make it up on ancillaries. This really gets into the retailing side of the story that I'm talking about. It's changing. It's very dynamic in nature. So when you look at it, and we look at it from the perspective of what we're trying to do, and it does drive back to the ancillaries, the bundled fares, dynamic offers that are beginning to enter the marketplace, these are the things that we are focused on. You know, when I speak with airline executives around the world, cost is still important. People are managing cost. But the thing that comes to the top of mind very quickly is how do I generate more revenue? Let's move on to the hotels, the hospitality side, and some of the trends that we're seeing there. A big drive to personalization and automation. How do we continue to focus on personalization and automation? And Clinton Anderson and his team, who lead hospitality, are deep into that. How is the sharing economy actually impacting this side of the business? Airbnb and what we're finding. And you're actually seeing Airbnb from a distribution perspective moving beyond just owned properties. You got to actually get into boutique hotels. How does that begin to change the landscape? There's a level of consolidation that continues to move into the marketplace. The other thing, and I do believe this is something that we have seen as we've evaluated the marketplace, is the continuing focus on outsourcing of technology. Because when you look at consolidation, you look at what's taking place in the marketplace, do you want to do this internally? Do you not want to do this internally? And we see ourselves relative to the capability of what we're doing from our platform and technology to be able to fulfill these needs. Let me talk about the agencies. And I'm going to talk about the agencies and a little bit on the meta side of the equation. I'm just going to touch at the top level of all these things because I want to get through a lot of stuff. As I mentioned earlier, low-cost carriers have had significant growth. OTAs, the online travel agencies around the world, have also had significant growth. If you go back to that same time frame, OTAs made in the early 2000s right around 6% of total global bookings. Today, they're sitting at about 27, 28% of global bookings. There's more and more demand on the travel management companies, specifically from corporations. Duty of care. How do we make sure that we're actually getting the right contracts with the different products that are out there that are going to fulfill the needs of their employees. Shopping. One thing that we deal with is the amount of shopping that's taking place in the environment. And this is really driven by the OTAs, the agencies, and the search engines. But today, and you've heard us talk about this, is we're seeing shopping volumes that are up 70, 80% year over year. Even though booking transactions are only up around 6, 7%, the amount of shopping activity is through the roof. And it's because of the number of offers that are being put out there and the way that the distribution tools or the forms of distribution, points of sales, are actually shopping all of that. The other thing is the continued focus on content. How do we make sure that we continue to get the content that agencies are able to sell as we move into the future? And then lastly, the consumer. The consumer is shop and compare, shop and compare, shop and compare. And you can put yourself in that seat because a lot of us shop and compare. But they're also looking for a seamless experience that is built for them. The final piece is mobile and mobility. If you look at retailing, distribution, and fulfillment, think about this. The retailing side is part of that 80% in shopping that I talked about. It's the shopping that is really taking place. The distribution side, which is really the selling of that transaction, has not exploded yet. We still find that people are not booking as much on mobile, but they're shopping, and that last piece of it, the fulfillment side, we all use it for fulfillment, right? We check in, we make changes, we do that from a mobile perspective. But mobile first, as we look at it as it relates to the customer side. So, there's growing expectations that are out there. And it really does get into how are we creating a seamless, modern retailing capabilities. Heightened level of personalization, complete mobility, enriched data and analytics. How many of you in the room feel like you have the right level of data and analytics to think about your future, to think about the opportunities in the future? Please raise your hand if you think you have enough. I don't think I see one hand. There's an enormous amount of opportunity for all of us as we look at this. The greater adoption of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain. And I can go through each example of where I see opportunities for that. If you look at the value chain of what we have today relative to the selling of the products, the GDS, the agencies, and the fulfillment to the customer, think about all the back office things that take place and how blockchain can actually change those things. The amount of transactions that actually can be linked and actually drive savings for all of us as we look at the future. The systems and the processes that we have today cannot deliver this. That's why we're thinking about this, because we have to be able to help you. We have to work together collectively as an industry on how we move these things forward. So, when I look at Sabre, I think we're in a very unique position. We sort of sit in the middle of all this. We understand the demands, we understand the complexity, and we're focused on helping define the future. How do we work together collectively to make sure that we're putting technology in front of you that allows you to be successful in your business? With this, we have the vision, we have the passion to want to do this. And for us, we're on a journey to transform to achieve this position. We've stopped thinking completely in verticals. Right? We're not just thinking airline solutions, we're not thinking just travel network, we're not just thinking about hospitality solutions. We're trying to think across it. It's important that we continue to deliver as it relates to each one of those business units and what we provide to you. But we're really thinking differently. How are we thinking horizontally and how they actually connect? Because they are interconnected and they are linked and they can create a lot of value. Today is a great illustration of that, right? Bringing all of you together and challenging you to think differently. Because as we think about this from a horizontal perspective, not a vertical perspective, I'm challenging you to think about it from the horizontal perspective as well. And with that, it's the approach that we're taking with ourselves, within Sabre, and it's what we're pushing as it relates to our customers and how we think the business of travel has to evolve. So, when I see Sabre, I see a very unified organization driving to be able to fulfill this. And when you sit at the center of this, it allows us to do it in a way that we can actually have great dialogue on what you will need to be successful going forward. So let me take a moment and just talk about retailing, distribution, and fulfillment. And when I look at retailing, it's really the capability of essentially putting products on the shelf, right? Retailing is really about putting products on the shelf. And in doing that, how are we making sure that we work with the airlines, the hoteliers, and others that we're helping you put your products on the shelf the way that you want them on the shelf? The second piece of it is distribution. And I don't care if it's the indirect channel or the direct channel. And as my team often hears me talk about this, it's just about distribution. Because there's been an enormous amount of investment in products and services, facilities, how do we make sure, be it the indirect channel or the direct channel, that that is being displayed properly and allowing you to sell those products? How do we then look at it from the agency side and making sure that you have the capabilities and the tools to be able to sell that? Part of the challenge is we also have to think about the commercial model changes, because they are interlinked, they are linked. And it's one thing that I will continue to challenge the industry is, if you want to sell more, you have to look at the entire chain of how products and services are actually being sold, because there's the capability of unleashing a lot more. You know, ancillaries. I don't know if everybody knows this or not. 90% of ancillary revenue is driven through the direct channel. There's a very small amount that's driven through the indirect channel. Now, to be fair, corporations buy a lot of tickets through the indirect channel, so they essentially have all those attributes in tickets. So you have to be somewhat careful there. But there's an enormous amount of opportunity to unleash capabilities through the indirect channel. The final piece is really the fulfillment. How do we look at the fulfillment? Right? And for us, it's a property management system with the hotels. It's the PSS system as it relates to the airlines. This really gets into retailing, distribution, and fulfillment and what we're looking at. And underneath that, you can't forget about the profiles, the data and the analytics, and how do we think about artificial intelligence? How do we think about machine learning? I want to share a video with you that really brings together everything that we do at Sabre and actually brings this to life so you can understand how we're thinking about the future.
How people live and thrive.
A world of travel filled with innovative ways for travelers to ease the experience, from booking to boarding, from arriving to experiencing.
A business of travel where our innovative technology, working behind the scenes, enables our customers to market products and services to make travel happen from departure to safe return.
We make it efficient for our customers to load schedules, manage inventory and rates that maximize revenue.
Effortless for a traveler to search routes and schedules.
Easy to book directly with a customer or on a favorite travel setting.
Engaging to work with travel agencies to search, shop, book, even access incentives while managing all the trip details.
And when travel day arrives, we make it reassuring to check in.
Reliable to check a bag and upgrade a seat, route a plane to a gate, assign a flight crew, and check the weight and balance of an aircraft.
Routine to pick up a car and head to a hotel, knowing all the details are managed, while your hotelier is ready for your arrival.
And when it's time to return home, we make it all happen again, using our technology to enable travelers to discover new scenes and make new memories, one traveler at a time.
Imagine the business of travel where our technology stands behind our customers' every promise, even though the traveler never knows we're there.
So hopefully that was helpful relative to bringing all those pieces together. And when we look at it more from that horizontal and not vertical perspective, we see the opportunity. And let me talk to you more about opportunity. The industry that we serve is absolutely massive. In 2017, just the selling of what we do throughout the travel ecosystem was about $1.6 trillion. If you look at that as it relates to countries and GDP, that would be actually the 10th largest country in the world between Brazil and Canada. If you take it a step further and you look at the indirect side of sales as well, you're now looking at an $8 trillion marketplace. Only China and the United States are larger. If you look at travel growth, it's growing at 5 to 6%. That's almost double global GDP. We are in a marketplace that continues to thrive. But how do we make sure that we're taking advantage of that opportunity? How do we make sure that when we look at it, we're looking at it on how do you expand, build off of that? I'm going to take a moment and just walk you through some of the things that we see taking place. And it really does start with airlines and hoteliers. This is probably going to be a little more airline focused, but it is in that entire system relative to how the breakdown of the business is happening, how we have to think about it, fulfillment all the way through. So today, you have a marketplace, or you can even back up 10 or 15 years. You're just really selling tickets. And in the mid-2000s, I was a part of Air Canada, and we started Tango Plus. We started a number of the branded fares that were out there and ancillaries. But today, large focus on ancillaries, and I just walked you through some of the stats relative to what's happening with average fares, what's happening with ancillaries in the marketplace. And we see that really in all forms relative to be the hotel side or the airline side, the desire to do this. Now, what I will share with you is I think there is an enormous amount of opportunity actually to continue to grow this. As I travel around the world, there's some airlines that are just introducing branded fares. There's some airlines that are just introducing ancillaries. If you look at how revenue optimization has happened as it relates to just managing fares, that's really not even taking place when we get into the branded fares and the ancillary side. Some are dabbling, but there's more opportunity. But guess what? We're thinking about different offers that are out there, dynamic offers. Go back to that port, if you look at it from a personalization perspective, and you look at it from a profile, how are we then thinking about changing and making a dynamic offer available? But there's certain attributes that you want, and it doesn't go based on a class of service, or it doesn't go based on a filing relative to a room rate. It's how are we creating the right offer, or helping you create the right offer to serve up to that customer. That drives a lot of complexity in the world, because you have an old structure that is out there, and you're introducing a new structure. We're sitting in a lot of those conversations. Let's take it a step further. If you create a platform, which we are very focused on doing that, why can't you bring more into that? If you think mobile first, and you think about the ability to have transactions along the way, why can't you bring more transactions into that? Just not the travel transaction side of the equation, but as a platform via API or web services, it's going to allow you to sell more products and services. It collects more data. Again, this is how we're thinking about the world. Why is that important? Why is that important to you? Because today, as we all look at our businesses, we're fighting for the pie, right? We're fighting for that pie is there. How do we collectively expand that pie, right? I'm not talking millions of dollars. I'm not talking billions of dollars. I'm talking trillions of dollars. How do you expand that pie? How do you make sure that the differentiated offers that are being provided are actually being displayed and sold properly? And this goes back to my point, it's all about just the distribution side. How do you fulfill, right? As you create complexity, the danger is fulfilling, because that's your brand promise. You now have to fulfill what you said you're going to provide to your customer. And that's going to be from the airlines, the hoteliers, it's going to be the agencies and what they're offering to their customers. How do you make sure that you're fulfilling this all along the way? And the important part of this, and you all think about this, is when you grow, how are you growing revenue? And how are you growing share? How are you getting a leg up? Again, that's the important piece relative to as we break this down. So, I have been the CEO of Sabre for about a year and a half. And my drive and my commitment has been to reimagine everything that we are doing. Everything that we are doing. Now, there are things that are out there that we're just not changing. We're not going to change. But more importantly, we're thinking how do we connect all these pieces together? Because that's the opportunity. How do we do that? And I'm focused on it as we look at it from where we work, how we're thinking about this, how we're helping one another inside Sabre, really is driven on how we're here to help you think about the changes that you want to drive in your business. Now, what I'll share with you, and it's funny, we're sort of in the same room that we kicked this off at the beginning of the year. We had roughly about the same number of individuals, Sabre employees, that were in this room right after the beginning of the year, and we launched what was called Sabre Next. And it's the focus of everything that I'm talking to you about today. And it's the internal drive relative to how do we look at the world differently. We still have to provide the services through the business units, airline solutions, hospitality solutions, and airline solutions. But how do we think about it? And yes, this is an internal initiative, but I want you to be aware of it because it's part of the changes that we have going on. And these changes are ultimately designed to be transformational for you. And it's about technology. Always stable, secure, and highly efficient. How do we continue to do that? It's about products. Innovation that spans the end-to-end sort of ecosystem, but also really gets into that retailing, distribution, and fulfillment. And don't think about just retailing, distribution, and fulfillment as only the commercial side. As the video illustrated, the operational side is just as important. It's all part of the fulfillment. And the other thing is our engagement. It really is the partnership. And it's really focused on ultimately helping you grow your revenues and increasing your share. The balance of the week, you're going to hear a lot more about this. You're going to hear about our focus. You're going to hear about our discipline. You're going to hear about our roadmaps. What are the things that we're doing? And that's the thing I keep challenging our teams within Sabre. Make sure our customers understand, because everything sort of snapshots in time, right? You remember this, but how do we take a step further and say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing next, this is where we're taking you? Because it's important that you understand where we're going with this and our commitment to do this. And really, before I hand it back to Barry, I really do want to thank you for joining us. We all have busy schedules, there's a lot that's going on, but you don't often get to bring a cross-section of talented individuals throughout the travel ecosystem to talk about the opportunity, talk about the challenges, but dream about where we want to take the industry, because it's collectively people in this room that are able to do that. So I'm going to ask you to please engage, be curious. And this is the one thing I tell the Sabre team all the time, be curious. Don't be afraid to challenge. Don't be afraid to think differently, because that's what's going to allow us to do transformational things. Being curious also means you got to challenge. Debate is good. One thing I want you to make sure you do throughout the week is I really want you to enjoy. I want you to take this in. Have fun, challenge, talk about the future, re-engage with friends that you haven't seen for a while. We're really glad that you're here. I want to thank you for being customers of Sabre, and we really appreciate everything. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.